In the previous Raw Talk, we looked at the Texas snowpocalypse, a situation caused and exacerbated by an all-Republican state utility council appointed by a Republican governor. Yet there were commenters determined to find some way to blame Democrats instead. In a state with a GOP-dominated House and Senate where Democrats have no power, it still just has to be the Democrats' fault somehow, even in a situation in which there were no Democrats anywhere involved. One commenter even said that the federal government cut the power to Texas to punish us for not voting for Biden, which is demonstrably false because Republicans here have Texas on our own separate and independent power grid, which is the problem. So believing that the government cut our power to punish us is as silly as believing that God causes earthquakes to punish homosexuals. But a lot of religious right Republicans believe that too. I wonder why none of the conservative Christians in the GOP ever complain that God sent the plague to punish us for our stupidity regarding masks and social distancing. Last week, I was willing to give the Texas governor the benefit of the doubt where he seemed to assume responsibility for fixing our state power grid. But since then, he has opted for a reported distraction by ending the state's mask mandate and reopening businesses to 100% when only 7% of the state is inoculated or vaccinated thus far.
Governor Greg Abbott joins us live now from Austin tonight. So, Governor, President Biden calling ending the mask mandate Neanderthal thinking and a, quote, big mistake. How would you respond?
You know, Chris, at a time when Texas is striving every day to provide more and more vaccines, today we set an all-time record in the number of vaccines we're administering to Texans. President Biden's administration itself is exposing Texans and Americans to COVID-19 through illegal immigrants that they are allowing to come into the state of Texas who are positive for COVID-19 and being released into Texas communities.
No,
what
Governor,
President Biden is doing is Neanderthal. What President Biden is doing, Chris, hold on. What President Biden is doing in Texas today is recklessly endangering the lives of Texans as we are trying to provide them vaccines. He must stop this practice now, exposing more Texans to COVID-19. It is completely unacceptable.
So, of course, this will cause yet another spike in infections and deaths. So he's repeating the same pattern we've already seen before, where we deregulate, and that predictably causes a crisis to spiral out of control such that people die. Nationally, the Republican Party can't seem to take responsibility to fix the problem either. I can't help but notice the elephant trumpeting loudly in the room. It doesn't seem like the Republican Party is ready to give up their golden idol. Even after Fox News called Pennsylvania in November 7th, cinching the Electoral College vote for Biden, you'd think that Americans could move forward. Trump's statement that same day could have been, like every other president before him, to concede the truth honorably. But instead, he misled. He gave his supporters a half-truth. The part he left out was that Biden beat him by over 7 million votes. Biden got 81.2 million votes in total. The most votes for any single candidate in U.S. history went to Biden, not Trump. But Trump wouldn't or couldn't admit that. And following that falsehood were many others. And most Republican elected officials lacked the courage of Maryland Republican Governor Larry Hogan to even congratulate the newly elected president on his win the day Biden cinched the Electoral College. Michigan Representative Adam Kinzinger was also one of the minority of Republicans that found the courage to speak the truth that day. Trump compete honorably? What was Kinzinger thinking?
The Democrats don't have grandstanders like Mitt Romney, Little Ben Sass, Richard Burr, Bill Cassidy, Susan Collins, and in the House, Tom Rice, South Carolina, Adam Kinzinger.
Kinzinger also called out an election conspiracy theory that had already quickly developed. We know that most other Republican congressmen dare not contradict Donald Trump because the GOP will censor their own people if they break out of lockstep and vote their conscience independently. My own Texas Senator John Cornyn finally made a timid effort to acknowledge the reality that Biden won the election, though it took him a month to do it. He finally did casually name President-elect Joe Biden in a tweet. Where was Mitch McConnell? Where were you, Mitch? McConnell finally congratulated Biden after the Electoral College count was certified on December 15th. 6 weeks after the election? Why didn't he admit that Biden won a month earlier, after Biden had cinched Pennsylvania? Did McConnell think that Trump would win his lawsuits to throw out legal votes there? The case was ruled by United States District Judge Matthew Brann, a Republican, who said, "One might expect that when seeking such a startling outcome, a plaintiff would come formidably armed with compelling legal arguments and factual proof of rampant corruption, such that this court would have no option but to regrettably grant the proposed injunctive relief despite the impact it would have on such a large group of citizens." That has not happened. Instead, this court has been presented with strained legal arguments without merit and speculative accusations. The Supreme Court also, even with 3 justices appointed by and stacked for Trump himself, still unanimously upheld the Pennsylvania decision and refused to block the certification of Pennsylvania's vote. In case after case, there were no findings of election fraud like Trump claimed. More than 60 court cases were filed by Trump and other Republicans contesting the election results. One of those cases ruled that some local official had exceeded their authority in some trivial capacity that had no impact on the election. But every case alleging widespread election fraud was dismissed or the Trumpers lost. Again and again, Republican judges, including some appointed by Trump himself, ruled against him. Even Trump's own attorney general said that the Department of Justice and the FBI had both declared that there was no evidence of Trump's claims of widespread election fraud. But that's not what most Americans saw. Instead, we saw televised hearings that were held in a hotel or where the alleged witnesses were, despite drunken claims of affidavits, were not held to an oath of perjury like they would have been if they'd given their testimony in Congress or in a courtroom. So it seems to me that the reason they did these in a hotel instead was to create the illusion of an official hearing, at least in the minds of all those viewers who didn't realize that this was going on in a ballroom or that no one was under oath. Trumpsters in my family thought that this was happening in the Senate, and they consequently believed that it confirmed evidence of election fraud and the cover-up of same. If you didn't know any better and if you didn't watch the whole thing, that's what it looked like. Giuliani's testimony was broadcast live on an exclusively Republican hearing where people took seriously his conspiracy theories involving the late Hugo Chavez. But we did not get TV coverage of the actual court cases wherein Giuliani admitted on public record that there never was any evidence of election fraud. Trump cannot admit defeat. That's why he lies constantly, bragging about everything he can exaggerate. So he claimed to have won the election by a landslide, but that his victory had been stolen by an evil cabal of anti-American conspirators, and his followers believed him.
Trump didn't lose the election, sir. But he did. Trump did not lose the election.
Every time Trump's lies were repeated by Republican pundits and right-wing propaganda channels, his voters became more enraged, especially when Republican senators like the cowardly Texan lion Ted Cruz kept trying to challenge the election results long after they were settled, undermining our democracy even further. Trump told his people over and over again that our democracy had fallen and that if they didn't fight, they would have no country left. It is not at all surprising that his followers took him seriously and literally.
January 6th was a disgrace. American citizens attacked their own government. They used terrorism to try to stop a specific piece of domestic business they did not like. Fellow Americans beat and bloodied our own police. They stormed the Senate floor. They tried to hunt down the Speaker of the House. They built a gallows and chanted about murdering the Vice President. They did this because they'd been fed wild falsehoods by the most powerful man on earth. Because he was angry he'd lost an election.
But many Trumpsters cannot accept that their candidate lost the election. They can't even admit that they're the ones who stormed the Capitol. Every time Republicans do something wrong, they try to find some way to shift the blame over to Democrats. I often hear the tu quo qui fallacy, that Democrats are bad too, which wouldn't justify anything, even if that was a fair statement, which it isn't. Because I often hear the fallacy of false equivalence, that both parties are just as bad, even when only one party had anything to do with this. No. One party is definitely a whole lot worse than the other. I don't see any leftists or liberals calling to sanction the systematic extermination of Republicans, conservatives, or the religious right. Instead, notice how many right-wingers are not just trying to justify discrimination, but who also call for the arrest and execution of gays, immigrants, and basically anyone with a conflicting religious perspective or political opinion. In my decades of experience as an activist, every attempt to undermine environmental protections, education, or constitutional rights, and every objection to science has always only ever come from Republicans. Then we hear the fallacy of projection, where Republicans pretend to be entirely innocent, as if the Dems did everything. They say this even about the insurrection, where several independent means confirm that the Capitol was raided by Trump supporters. The Trumpers still pretend.
That was all the left. We have all the proof. There's tons of proof.
January 6th was a plan that was pre-planned by the Democrats.
I knew that it was pre-organized by Antifa.
That was all the left dressed up, the Antifa, the BLM, dressed up as Trump supporters.
A movement by the communists to make it look like Trumpers did it.
Let's be clear here and look at the reality.
Former President Trump's actions preceded the riot were a disgraceful dereliction of duty. The House accused the former president of, quote, incitement.
Because the election was stolen from us.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth.
The vast majority of Republican senators knew this full well, but they still refused to convict their man, and many still pretend that he won that election. And now we have to talk about the prophecy. Remember all those evangelicals pretending that God told them that Trump would win in a landslide?
I said, Lord, Joe Biden don't need to be president. And just like this, just like if you'd answered me, he said he won't.
I want to say without question, Trump is going to win the election.
And God has assured me today when he walked into my room and woke me up at noon, almost noon, 11:55 a.m. And he came in and he yelled as loud as he possibly could, "Can you not stand and not turn to the left and give yourself as a partner to the evil that wants to take this land?" Well, I say no, it will not happen. It will end and it will be done because I say it will be done. Watch my hand move. Now that man is done with their process, I will put my show on. And justice will be served, says your God. So stand in the light or run to the darkness. But nothing will stop me from my plan of putting my son, Donald Trump, back in that White House.
Joe Biden and Kamala, whatever her name is, Harris, will never be president and vice president. Stop calling them elect. Joe Biden didn't win. He's not the president. He will never be the president. And come January the 20th, I'm telling you, I'll be bing, 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 winner, winner, chicken dinner, referring back to this video.
Can they now admit that God was wrong? Or that they were wrong when they said that God was talking to them? Can you imagine what would happen to their ministry if they ever admitted something honestly like that? So they go into denial instead.
Today, the Twitter sphere has been crazy. YouTube has been nuts. My phone has blown up. I mean, I got full-grown pastors, okay? Full-grown adult men sending me text messages, sending me inbox messages, asking me when I'm going to repent and resign my church because I said Trump was going to win the election and Trump didn't win. Let me tell you something. Trump won by landslide, ladies and gentlemen. So we don't have one thing to apologize for.
Someone in my family who really loves prophecies pointed me to this one, which a lot of people actually believe, I'm sorry to say. Ezra sees the future of America in a vision 2,600 years ago, where president after president will rule for 100 years as puppets to secret masters that awaken after Donald Trump becomes president to kill him. They will succeed. They will kill his next 3 successors in short order and then rule the world atop the new American European world government. Since believers cannot accept or admit when their assorted prophecies fail, as they typically do, because that means that the Bible is wrong or their faith is wrong, then they cannot admit that Biden won the election and that Trump won't be assassinated in the second term that he won't get, and that he won't have any successors to be assassinated later on either. The U.S. can rise as predicted, but only because Trump took us down to such a low depth. And that is another notion they cannot accept, as this article paints bad as good and says that good things are bad. So it was prophesied that on January 20th, Trump was supposed to declare martial law and arrest legions of radical, cannibalistic, pedophile, communist devil worshippers, which is how the Trumpers describe the Democratic Party.
This whole thing with Biden is just, he's like a puppet president. The military is in charge. It's going to be like Myanmar, what's happening in Myanmar. The military is doing their own investigation, and at the right time, they're going to be restoring the republic with Trump as president.
But that didn't happen. Instead, Trump vacated the premises to skulk in his Florida golf resort, while Joe Biden was inaugurated the 46th president of the United States. Hard believers can't admit that Trump lost, because I guess they think that Romans 13:1 somehow applies only to Republicans and not also to Democratic presidents. So they moved that prophecy to March 4th, today. Trump is supposed to rise again, just like the South never did, unless you count January 6th and admit who the insurrectionists really were. And remember that the insurrection was also an attempted resurrection of the Trump administration. The new prophecy is that today, Donald Trump will seize power again with military aid to be inaugurated as the 19th president of the United States, according to a misunderstanding of a 19th century law, implying that Trump was never the 45th president, at least not legitimately anyway. Now, these conspiracy theorists think that the last legitimate president was Ulysses S. Grant, who was the last one inaugurated on March 4th instead of January 20th. Now, because of all the lies and stoking and inciting violence, police have beefed up security at the Capitol today because of another credible threat of violence from white supremacist militia group. Is it coincidental that all the white supremacist groups support Trump? When today comes and goes, and Trump is still dethroned as president, will the conspiracy theories and false prophecies come to an end? It's like every time some prophet predicts the end of the world on such and such date, and it never happens. There's never an admission that it didn't happen. Instead, there's always some excuse that it really happened if you believe that it did, or that it happened spiritually, whatever that means, or that what was foretold has commenced in some imperceptible way, but is not yet complete. It never will be. When Trump got elected, I had no problem accepting that painful reality, despite knowing what damage would be and was done. I didn't join a mob of paranoid lunatics fomenting violence and ransacking our Capitol and beating police officers with an American flag. Now, I won't make a fool of myself by wearing a Biden hat everywhere, and I won't refuse to give him up when he's no longer in office. No politician is so important to me that I would worship them like they're anointed by God, like this chump bowing to a graven image. You know, 4 years ago, I remember a lot of Trumpsters telling me to suck it up, Buttercup. Your candidate lost fair and square. Now it's your turn. What's it going to take for you to admit that your guy lost fair and square and that this election was not stolen? That Biden won both the popular vote and the Electoral College, and that he won the most secure election in American history by historic margins. What's it going to take for you to admit that QAnon was never anything but idiotic, prejudiced, and paranoid nonsense, that your prophecies are wrong, and that your prophets are frauds and liars thinking wishfully out of their collective asses? I'm going to prophesy that in the spring of 2021, Donald Trump will still not be president.